I've heard the term self-mastery before. I think I know what it is. I've taken a lot of Joe Dispenza classes, but
Mhm.
please share, just in case, what is self-mastery?
Well, the easiest way for most people to understand mastery in general is we know how to do it outside of ourselves, right? So we became A students. We knew how to master curriculum, right? We knew how to study for an exam in sports or in an instrument, right? To become proficient, you have to practice. You have to create neural pathways to become a master at an instrument, a master at a sport. But when have we ever asked to be the master of our own self, right? The master of our own emotional states, the master of our own thoughts?
Hi, I'm Glennis Woods Mullins, and I love to help women to vibe, to be more vibrant, intuitive, beautiful, and empowered in midlife. So come on, let's vibe.
Complete and full disclosure. We are doing this podcast the same day that we had the announcement of a new president. And I kind of thought that this is so apropos because people's feelings are all over the place. The only feeling that I haven't run across since I've been talking to people today is they have no feelings. They all have feelings. And the interesting thing is, how do we encode those feelings? What's really going on? I'm just so excited to have with us today Carol Murko, and she's going to be talking about something that's really, truly important. She is a student and also a consultant of Dr. Joe Dispenza. She does a lot with helping people with their energies and kind of changing things around in terms of how we think about things and just raising our overall conscious level as we move through this life. And I think one of the things that's so important about what she does is that it really can wake you up into how to look at something. She is what we call a self-mastery coach. She's a mindset self-mastery and health coach, and she is dedicated to activating that healer within each individual. She's also founder of Love, Heat, and Heal. And Carol champions the belief that true healing begins with your self love, conscious eating, and wellness practices such as breathwork, meditation, and journaling. Oh, my goodness, Carol, welcome to the Vibe Living podcast. It's wonderful having you here today.
Well, it's actually really wonderful to be here with you today.
I know, especially today. I have to admit, we were kind of chatting beforehand.
Yeah.
And I have so many questions. I've heard the term self-mastery before. I think I know what it is. I've taken a lot of Joe Dispenza classes, but
Mhm.
please share, just in case, what is self-mastery?
Well, the easiest way for most people to understand mastery in general is we know how to do it outside of ourselves, right? So we became A students. We knew how to master curriculum, right? We knew how to study for an exam in sports or in an instrument, right? To become proficient, you have to practice. You have to create neural pathways to become a master at an instrument, a master at a sport. But when have we ever asked to be the master of our own self, right? The master of our own emotional states, the master of our own thoughts. And that is what self-mastery is. It's taking all of those skills that we know how to do outside of us to become masters, to
Mhm.
direct them inside of us. And to do that, we have to first become aware of how we are showing up in the world. Like, what is our state of being? What are our thoughts? What are the actions that we're taking, the choices that we're making? And then ultimately, what are the feelings? And it's interesting because I think the feelings today for many people are hitting the gamut of all the negative ones, right? Anger, sadness, fear, frustration, confusion, disappointment. Like those are very low frequency
Low vibration.
emotions, right? Low vibration emotions. And those emotions create the hormones of stress.
Mm. Cortisol,
Cortisol, adrenaline, no
all the stuff,
oxytocin there.
right? All the stuff that our bodies produce mostly to aid us, but not necessarily for the use. It's not supposed to be produced in those large quantities. And that's one of the reasons why it's so important that maybe we learn how to digest those emotions in a effective way. But I got to ask you this. How
Mhm.
did you come to be so fascinated with the idea of self-mastery?
Well, it's as one might guess, it's usually some sort of wake up call that you get from the universe. And for me, it was a theoretically incurable eye disease. So
Hmm.
it was the potential of becoming blind that kind of, and the no known cure in the Western medical model.
Mhm.
And so when I started looking at alternatives, and there are many. I mean, we live in an amazing time when we do have a fairly robust Western model, but sorry, my dog is like pawing me.
Oh, that's
Um,
okay. He wants to get into
um,
the conversation.
that's right. It's like, Mom. But we have also a really robust set of alternative types of healing out there. And Dr. Joe Dispenza, I think, fits that into the alternative space. And, when I was on the beginning part of my journey, I tripped into his work. And when I began to understand that we have everything within us to create the life that we want, whether it be healing, the job that we want, the partner that we want, the house that we want, all of that, right? But we're not taught to manage our thoughts, right? And so a lot of times most people, because we live in a society that statistically produces the hormones of stress 70% of the time. And the
Mhm.
hormones of stress are addictive. So without knowing it, we are unconsciously addicted to these negative emotions. And so
Mm.
we stay in those loops. And many of them happen beneath the surface of our conscious awareness. And so what this work does, the Dr. Joe Dispenza work is, we teach the neuroscience and the biology of how our brain and body work. So first is like understanding that our actual thoughts produce chemicals. Every single thought that we have produces a chemical. We have not 60 to 70,000 thoughts a day. 90% of those thoughts are the same thoughts we had yesterday.
Mm.
So, as you might imagine, with all those thoughts, most of them are not conscious. They're unconscious thoughts. And 70% of those produce the hormones of stress. So the work is about making the unconscious conscious. So beginning to identify like, you know, I feel frustrated, right? So if you're feeling frustrated, it might be a good idea to take your journal out and trace back what thought created that frustration. Did you have some expectation of yourself or others? And are you addicted to that concept of like setting yourself up, right, for frustration, right? Because it's like, oh, well, I should be an A student and I should do this. I'm Wonder Woman. I can get all of these things done, right? And then, oh my gosh, you didn't get them done. And then you're frustrated at the end of the day. That will become a habit and that will become something that you will loop on. And then that creates those hormones of stress in your body. And guess what? We live, in the state of creation or we live in the state of survival. Survival was a very important part of being a human being, be able to run, fight or hide. But in modern society, we live in that state 70% of our time. And that's why there's so much disease. And so that's how I
Mm.
got to this work. So I realized that, my perfectionism thing, my good girl gene, all of this conditioning that I had as a young woman, a girl, and even, an adult woman were not serving me. But I was very unconscious about being those things, right? I just was, and then I now said, I spent a lot of years being my own personal mean girl.
Mhm. Okay, you would beat up on yourself. You didn't need anyone else to do it. You would do it yourself.
Exactly.
There's something that you said that was interesting. You mentioned about journaling, and I think it would be really kind of an aha moment for those that are listening. Why is journaling so impactful? What's the neuroscience behind that?
So there's a few things. First of all, the connection to your hand to the pen to the page is very somatic, right? Like there you have your body involved.
Mm-hmm.
There's also when you journal first thing in the morning before we still have a little melatonin in our system. We're
Mm-hmm.
still
Mm-hmm.
in a state of brainwave state that's not highly active yet. We really can kind of touch some of those. Here comes the dog right here. She wants to be part of the interview. She's like, Mom, if you're not gonna pay attention to me, I'm just gonna
I'm
jump
gonna
right
make
in
you pay,
here.
right. Oh, hi there, little guy. That's fine. I'm a dog person. That's fine.
Good. Well, hopefully your listeners are too, but and it's a total aside, but animals they know a lot more than we realize, right? So I
I
think
think
they're
they're smarter than us
probably
in a lot of ways. Plus, they've figured out a way for us to have a great life, kick back, eat, sleep, whatever, and don't have to do anything for it except for just be around. I
right.
think they're smarter than us. They figured that
I
out.
I agree. And then the ones that ended up in our lives, right? Like are even the smartest because they get anyway, so the journaling is a powerful tool because we could write down what we're thinking, what choices we're making, what actions we're taking, and then, tying those to feelings that we are experiencing. And it's private, right? It's not for anybody else's eyes
Mhm.
except your own. And so you have this somatic experience, then you have this experience of really truth telling, right? And then the next stage after you've written your truth is to what I call is write yourself happy. Because,
Mm.
if I'm feeling frustrated or sad, and, I wrote a lot this morning when I woke up, it gives you the opportunity to get it all out on the page, right? All of that negative stuff. So you're not carrying it with you. But you can't just leave it at that. You have to now move to an elevated state, or you have to move to happy because you mentioned the word, raising consciousness in the introduction to me. And I believe that, many of us doing this type of work, our purpose is to help raise the consciousness of the planet, even if it's one person at a time,
Yes,
a
which
group at a
which is
time.
really something that we could use right now, given the current circumstances today, but just in general in the world. In fact, I had a chance to talk to some friends through the night this morning, right before I talked to you. Everybody's talking, and I can sense the unease, the anxiousness. And a lot of times that unease and anxiousness can lead to other things if we don't know how to manage them in the right way. So, what kinds of things do you do with people to help them deal with their feeling of fear and anxiety?
Yeah. Well, the first thing when we're in that sort of extreme emotion of fear and anxiety,
Mhm.
that I need to get people out of their heads, right? And
Mhm.
so the best way is to do breath work. Breath work is active, right? You have to focus on your breath, whether it's as simple as a box breath or if you're doing a yogic Kriya breathing technique.
Mhm.
Or I also teach Qigong, and there are a few breathing techniques in Qigong. All of those types of breath work are, how would I describe it? They are conscious, right? You are consciously changing your breath. And when we do conscious breathing, our nervous system recognizes it. And it activates our parasympathetic nervous system, which is the rest and repair.
Mm.
And you may not even feel like you've came down out of your anxiety, but your body begins to, shut down the production of those chemicals and moves towards creating the rest and repair chemicals. So it's
And
an,
this is
yeah.
very interesting to me in particular because I am doing what I'm doing now because about 18 years ago, I was diagnosed with an anxiety disorder. And I took a respite for a year. And when it was time for me to go back to work, I was feeling a little bit better, but I just decided I'm not going to put myself back in the same,
Mm,
you know, I'm
yeah.
not going back to corporate America because that was part of the source. And I found out later there were three sources of my anxiety. Part of it was working in corporate America and climbing that corporate ladder, being the only African American, being
Mm,
the only female in a male dominated kind of thing, and getting to C-suite and almost losing my mind. And the other part was post traumatic stress, which was involved with how I found out about my mom. She was hit by a fire truck on her way to work, and how I found out about that was very traumatic. And the
mm,
third thing was menopause, which
mm,
is something that I found out many years later. A doctor never mentioned it because, this was 17 years ago. Now maybe they
right.
would. But they never mentioned about the idea of how the hormones can drive up that feeling of anxiety. And you reminded me of that when you talked about the chemicals, because a lot of people don't realize that your emotions can bring up chemicals. And if it's kind of like an overload, that can be damaging to the body. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So we produce a lot of adrenaline, a lot of cortisol when we're in stress, right? That is just, and if you think about, okay, so if in when we were evolving as humans, we were hunter-gatherers, right? So we needed the stress response when we're out there hunting and gathering because, there could be some sort of a wild animal that would be chase us. So we needed that rush of adrenaline so that we could prepare to run, fight, or hide, right? And so what happens when we are in stress, there's a physiological process, like our pupils dilate, our blood moves to our extremities, our heart rate changes, our breathing changes as we prepare to run, fight, or hide. We also become narrowly focused, right? So
Mm,
because we're really, what are the three things that we think about? We think about our environment, right? Our body and time. So
mm.
obviously, when we were hunter-gatherers, you kind of knew it was in nature, right? But in modern society, what's our environment? It's the people, right? The things, right? I mean, this has created a lot of anxiety, right?
Yes,
Like
boy.
it's the stuff, all the stuff. I mean, look at all the books that I can't throw out on me. Like, and
Exactly, exactly.
like, and then time, right? So, and it's linear time, right? It's that time like where we're worried about, the future and we are bitching about the past and we forget to be in the present moment. And so being, overly concerned about our environment, our body and time keeps us in survival, right? And so that's what happens. And so when we're in survival, we also produce a lot of adrenaline. I always tell people we create the same amount of adrenaline by having anxious thoughts that a guy in a squirrel suit, right, who is an adrenaline junkie, jumping off a cliff, right, doing the like squirrel thing and then putting his parachute up and landing, right? Same adrenaline.
Adrenaline rush. Isn't that interesting? And a lot of people don't realize, for me, I would get it first thing in the morning. I would wait. And I realized later that part of that was because my cortisol levels were really, really up. And when your cortisol levels are high like that in the morning, you're going to feel maybe a little queasy, anxious. Something doesn't feel right. More than likely, that's what it is. And one of the things I had to learn was get up first thing in the morning and start moving. And basically try not to sit down at all for at least the first hour, hour and a half, or whatever to kind of adjust.
Mm.
Lots of times I'll go for a walk early in the morning. I have a whole morning routine that I
Yeah.
do. But when it's too cold outside, in the wintertime, I may not go walking right away. So I'm walking around the house, doing the dishes, doing the laundry, just moving.
Yeah.
And over time, I learned to drive down those levels. And I'm happy to say that I haven't had anxiety like I used to have probably, I don't know, in what, 10 years or so. But it took
Yes.
a while for me to, to figure out. It took a combination of things. And sometimes in order to move forward on things, it takes a combination of things in your toolkit. And one of the things that I had to learn, and you talk about this a lot, was guarding my thoughts. in
Yeah.
terms of how I let my thoughts influence how I was feeling. And my understanding is that your thoughts can make you sick. Why is
Hmm.
that?
Because the thoughts create chemicals, right?
Ah,
And and if you have happy thoughts, they're going to produce the good chemicals, right? The dopamine, the oxytocin, the serotonin. But knowing that we spend statistically 70 to 80% of our time producing the hormones of stress, right? Which
mhm.
are the cortisol, are the adrenaline. And when we have too much of that in our system, it knocks our system out of balance and that leads to dis-ease. So it's that simple. We, something that was very adaptive as human beings evolved has become maladaptive in modern society because we can create stress by thought alone.
Yeah, I totally believe that. So for someone who's trying to achieve self-mastery, having more control over what they're thinking, having more control over how their chemical imbalances or how their chemical balances are going on, what's the first step? What kinds of things do they need to do?
Well, they have to love themselves enough first, right? So we're talking self-love, right? To
Mhm.
actually do any practice, like consistently every day. It sounds like you were able to do it because you were confronted, right, with severe anxiety. I was able to
Yeah.
do it because I was confronted with the potential of becoming blind.
So we both
Um,
had an event that was like,
right.
okay, now you got to do something.
Right. But why wait for an event
Right,
like that,
exactly. I'm
right?
with you on that one.
Why change in times of suffering? We can actually like change in times when things are going okay. Because like we get these exogenous things like an election that doesn't go in the way that we were expecting, that knocks everybody for a loop, right? I mean, every single person I know is just like a zombie today, just
Mhm,
besides themselves and including myself.
mhm. And
But
me.
yeah, but what I did first is I wrote myself happy this morning, right? Like I know that there are no accidents. That's a Taoist philosophy. I also know that, things change. We live in I mean, we have no idea like what it's going to be like next week. We have no idea what it's going to be like in a minute. Like,
Right, right.
and that, and that the only thing that any of us have domain over is this, right? Ourselves.
Right.
And that
It's
is
all it's
why,
all inner directed, not the outer, but the inner. And
right.
we as women have a tendency to be outer directed because we're always so busy doing things for others outside of ourselves. We're nurturers. We've got our children, our husbands, our family, our coworkers, our friends, the neighbor. I mean, we're always this way. And what
Right.
happens a lot of times is that we forget to stop and pour back in everything that we're pouring out. And one good thing about giving out that way is that hopefully it is clearing space more for you to receive, but it doesn't always happen that way because we don't consciously work on the idea of clearing space. And I wanted to talk to you about that because you mentioned about the journaling and
Mhm.
how you get stuff out, but why is that important to get it out? Other than the chemical thing, why else is it important to get it out?
Well, it's the letting go, right? It's the letting go. It's so because we are 99.9999% energy.
Mm,
And so so if you think about it that way, then we're a vessel of energy. So if we're always like expending energy, right, for to help to take care of our families, to do our work, or even expending energy and just with thoughts of anxiety or like frustration or anger or sadness, those are energy sucking thoughts. So we are depleting our energy tank. And so, you kind of have to think of it. It's like I always tell my clients to like create a assets and liabilities column, right? I kind of go back to my finance days and it's just like, what's filling your tank? What's depleting your tank? And then see where those energy leaks are and figure out
mm,
how can I, like change my behavior, change those energy leaks. It could be, changing some of your thoughts, like changing some of your behaviors, changing some of your choices, getting rid of some people in your life, right? That are energy
Mhm.
vampires, right? The ones that just suck the energy out of you. And then it could be finding those things that fill your tank. Because sometimes we forget, like, what does fill my tank, right? Like, you spend so much time doing all this other stuff, but then you need to figure out, like, what fills my tank. And for me, it's actual practices, right? It's like my Qigong, and Qigong is a Chinese martial art. Qigong means the cultivation of energy. I have a good practice for you. There's a flat-footed marching, and I can share with you maybe offline, where you basically do flat-footed marching, like boom, boom, but not knee high, like sort of like you want to almost slap the floor with your foot and
Mhm.
then hold prayer hands. And this part of our hand
Mhm.
is the pericardium, which is the heart protector. So
Mhm.
and you just start marching and
Mhm.
you're tapping into Mother Earth, right? And so there you
Almost like
are.
a grounding exercise.
Exactly. So I often do that in the morning when I'm waiting for the coffee, right? Or I'm letting the dogs
Mhm.
out
Mhm.
and it you could feel like the heat coming up through Mother Earth into your feet, and then it just energizes me. And 5 minutes is all I need, right? And then that's just, that's not even a technical practice of mine, right? It's just that I know that while I'm just waiting around for the dogs and all this other stuff at 5:30 in the morning, I could give myself 5 minutes of a good
Yes.
start, right?
Yes,
And
I totally believe in grounding. I have a little spot right outside my office. In fact, you can see where my 2 feet are. I have I've kind of I've been doing it for a long time, so there's no grass growing there anymore. But first of all, from a wellness perspective, it's good for you because it can help to replace some of those minerals that you're just not getting anymore because so much of our food is depleted because of the way it's
right,
processed, the way it's grown, or whatever. But
yeah,
also, your feet are very absorptive. And so you're in that mud and it's absorbing the feet, but it's a great way to connect with Mother Nature. And I always find myself getting more zen and getting out of my head in terms of all that stuff. And all
yeah.
of a sudden, there's a calming effect. I don't know if it's because of the minerals in the ground, but it
Or
does
the
work.
electromagnetic, frequencies that are
Oh, okay,
coming
that
up.
could be it. Yeah. All right, Carol, you're right about that. We talked before we got started talking about all of this about, how it's so important for us to be able to take care of ourselves in terms of our emotional health, our mental health, because of the energies we put out there in the world. And we talked about how it could start with you, just one person at a time. If each person, for instance, were to take some of the tips we talked about here on the podcast, it could make a difference inevitably of the people around you. They might even ask, "Boy, you're different. Your aura is different. You look brighter. You seem, like in a good mood, and you never are. What's going on?" And then you share your practice with them, and then they do it, and one person at a time. And next
Right.
thing you know, you have a happy world. I don't know. Is that possible?
It is possible. It's absolutely possible. And if I don't know if you've read this book by Dr. David Hawkins, it's called Power versus Force.
No, no, no.
He is an MD. He passed away a few years ago,
Mm.
but he over 30 years, and his book came out in 2009. He decided he was going to map consciousness. And he used the scientific method of inquiry. And what he did was he used muscle testing to evaluate the different emotional states. And what he did, and I don't really understand like his scientific part, but he
Mhm.
was able to create a log scale of our emotional states, with shame being lowest and then enlightenment being the highest. And then he was able to look at each of the emotional states and what type of frequency they created. And as you go up the frequency scale, he was able then to measure the impact that just you as a person was putting out there in terms of like the frequency, the aura, whatever you want to call it, that we were putting out. So as you might imagine, the very low density frequencies are shame and hate and fear, and as you move up, you get to like courage, and eventually you get to to joy and love and peace. But as you move towards those positive emotions, he was able to prove that they have an exponential impact on the frequency of the planet of so I move into love, that could have an electromagnetic effect on like maybe a few hundred people,
Wow,
right?
that's
So
amazing.
he was able to measure the enlightened people on the planet at the time, and I think there were 9 at the time. And he was able to conclude that one enlightened being offset 70 million people in
Wow,
low vibing emotions, right?
I love that.
So that for me has become my reason for being, right? Just that little nugget is just like, if I can just keep myself here, heart and up, right? As much as I can. We're human, like we're gonna be sad, we're gonna be frustrated, we're gonna have, but we just don't stay there, right? Like,
Right,
because we have
exactly.
emotions, we have to experience them, but we don't need to like wallow, right? We
And that's
need
a
to,
conscious choice. You mean you really
yes.
can pull yourself out. And I mean, I feel better just already talking to you, Carol.
Good,
Better than
good.
I was when we first started this conversation.
Yay! But
That is so wonderful.
isn't it
And it's
amazing?
interesting too, because we really do have an impact on the world, both positive and negative. And who wants to have a negative impact? I don't think anybody starts the day saying, I want to
No.
have a negative impact on the world today. It's
Yeah,
usually you want to do something good and
right,
kind and uplift at least your family members or your co-workers or whatever, or be uplifting
right.
yourself. So this information is invaluable. I am so glad that you were here. And
Me
thank you so
too.
much. It's interesting because the name of my podcast is Vibe Living. And Vibe actually is an acronym that stands for being vibrant, intuitive, beautiful, and empowered.
Mm.
And that's why I believe that all women in particular can be. But sometimes it takes a conscious effort. And the things you shared with us today, I think would really help people to get on the road to vibe living. So thank you so much for being on the podcast. It's been
Oh
wonderful having you here
gosh, thank
today.
you so much. It was really, gosh, we've exchanged really positive energy because I feel elated and in a better place as well. So thank you.
You. And listen, everybody, Carol's bio is there and all of her social media is there. Check her out and find out more about what she does and how she can help you raise your vibration and begin to have different kinds of thoughts. And she does this wonderful thing with food too. You just got to go and check her out so you can
Thank
find
you.
out how she can help you as well. And thank you to all of you for listening to this podcast. Thanks for listening to the Vibe Living Podcast. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment, and share this podcast. Have a fantastic day, and don't forget to vibe. Bye-bye, everybody.